Welcome to White Guys for Kamala. I'm John Ennis. This is my co-host Morley.
Hey.
Thank you for joining us. We're just a couple of guys who wanted to do better by women than we did in 2016. So we're doing this podcast to defend our female nominee this time around, and to also maybe offer some tips for the modern man on how to set a good example in today's society. So we're going to start today by talking about self-respect. I think self-respect is a really interesting idea because it's something only you can give yourself. You know, there's ego, there's flattery, there's different levels of that kind of attention that we get that means something to us. But when it comes to self-respect, there's something that you have to have done for yourself to achieve it and to be okay with it. And people without it tend to not respond well to people trying to flatter them or beat them up because they know better in themselves.
Yeah, I think that true self-respect requires a certain amount of acceptance of yourself and the various different flaws that you can acknowledge to some degree and say, you know, I understand myself truly and I respect it beyond those things, as opposed to relying on a kind of fantasy to create some level of like, well, I'm the best. I'm the best at everything. I'm this. I'm that. You know, that I think, you know, there is a difference between a person who has a healthy self-respect and a case of narcissism. Certainly, you know.
Yeah, and I think ego is something, you know, that's the kind of thing that is tempting for all of us, and you know, fame and adulation and that kind of recognition, but as you'll see living in LA, there's plenty of people who are successful who aren't happy with themselves, you know, and that's one of the things that can be misleading, is that thinking that like, well, if everybody else is kissing my ass, then obviously I must be happy.
Or chasing this, you know, that the more applause I get, the more I'm allowed to respect myself. That if enough people do, you know, give me awards or money or fame or, you know, praise, all that stuff, that somehow is going to equal self-respect. That's certainly, I think, a problem and a fallacy in Los Angeles.
That's right. Yeah. And I was listening to an actor talk about how, you know, when he finally saw himself in a Spider-Man movie, you know, he thought when he saw himself 30 feet tall, he'd be like, I made it. I did it. It was all work. It all paid off, and it happened, and nothing changed, you know, and he realized, and this is, in the meantime, he's got a drinking problem, and it's getting worse, and he's like ruining his life, and he's losing his car and his apartment and his friends, and he had to work on himself. And so that's how you actually earn self-respect for yourself. There's no amount of like,
and then the other side of that coin is I've known people who have worked on franchises, like action film franchises, and like the first one, the star of it was like level-headed, you know, excited team player, and then the sequel, after the first one did really well, became, you know, a little bit more obsessed with himself, you know, had a bigger entourage, you know, and just as the sequels progressed, he was like, I watched this guy disappear more and more with each you know, progressive film, and with more fame and more money, everybody was saying yes, everybody was saying you're great, everyone was, you know, and all of a sudden this person just changed, and the success obviously brought out, you know, worse and worse things within him.
Like, those are problems that you know you did that you have to live with, you know, and that's how the self-respect can start to go down, even as you're outwardly more successful, thriving, making money. And you see this a lot, I think, with really rich people who are so used to hearing yes, whatever they said.
Right.
And they end up, you know, their world is blown up if somebody contradicts them, or in public, like they can't even believe that this happened.
Yeah. I think that it's interesting to consider what somebody like, say, Donald Trump, who has been, you know, raised certainly with a tremendous amount of money, a tremendous amount of privilege in his life, and how that affects a person when they don't even have a sort of thing to go back to. There, you know, if there's a sobering moment for him, he can't say, well, let me go back to before I was successful and when I was more grounded, you know, and there is no grounding for him because of his, you know, and that's not to say that every person that's born rich and is raised, you know, privileged goes through that. But I think that he's a very specific case of a person who has grown up in a certain way and a certain lifestyle, and there is no reality for him beyond the reality that has been fashioned in his life already.
Yeah.
And I think it creates a disconnect, you know, with everyday people, certainly everyday life. That's why he thinks everything he says is genius, even if it's just taking out two different sizes of Tic Tacs and saying this is inflation. He's like, the people will get this because it makes sense to me, even though it's like, no, the people understand that's two different sizes of Tic Tacs, that it's not inflation. You know what I mean? I'm fascinated by the psychology of that, you know?
This is a quote from Joan Didion, a great writer. And of course, she's going to put this better than I can. To do without self-respect is to be an unwilling audience of one to an interminable documentary that details one's failings, both real and imagined, with fresh footage spliced in for every screening. There's the glass you broke in anger. There's the hurt on X's face. Watch now, this next scene, the night Y came back from Houston. See how you muff this one. To live without self-respect is to lie awake some night beyond the reach of warm milk, phenobarbital, and the sleeping hand on the coverlet, counting up the sins of commission and omission, the trusts betrayed, the promises subtly broken, the gifts irrevocably wasted through sloth or cowardice or carelessness. However long we postpone it, we eventually lie down alone in that notoriously uncomfortable bed, the one we make ourselves. Whether or not we sleep in it depends, of course, on whether or not we respect ourselves. You know, it takes a certain kind of lack of self-respect, I think, to tell such grandiose lies, such as the idea that Taylor Swift endorsed you running for president just because you posted a picture. When something is so easily disproven,
I accept.
Yeah, like... the idea that Donald Trump thought this was a good idea, that he's so worried about approval because that's all he knows. He doesn't have self-respect. Yeah. He needs that kind of validation from the highest levels of people complimenting him, and when he can't get it, he has to make it up and pretend and hope. And because, well, that impression will get other people to respect, and that's still something, you know, and none of this is fulfilling for him, and that's why he's always miserable, and that's why he's always taking it out on others. But I think it shows just how far gone he is, and it's not just, I know weird was a fun thing to say, but it's deeply psychopathic, you know.
I mean, there's something so fascinating and about the notion that a person that can lie big, it's somehow, the bigger, the more grandiose the lie, the more you can kind of trick people into being like, well, I mean, but he's not, I mean, he wouldn't have just made that up though, right? I mean, like, he wouldn't have just put a picture that somebody else, that doesn't make, and then it just sort of like, it requires people, and this is obviously, we talked about this in the first episode, the requirement for people to constantly sort of like shift their reality to align with Donald Trump's, where that makes sense. That's something that, you know, like, oh, well, he didn't mean that we'll never have to vote again. He didn't mean exactly, like, all of the shifting and the realignment for things to make sense. But when it comes to stuff like that, where you're just like, well, I mean, what is the plan there? To assume that she won't say, I didn't endorse him. I didn't even pose as Uncle Sam. That's, you know, like, I mean, I don't know what the game plan was for that. And once again, it's not even like he can hide behind the, like, well, I retweeted it, you know, like, I mean, right? That's like, he tweeted that picture.
Yeah, he posted that. And even to say like, oh, I was confused.
Right.
Like, how does that help? You know?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I saw it online. It must be true. Like, how is a gullible candidate for president?
He's
like
supposed to be the candidate for president. He's acting like the ant that doesn't know that, like, deep fakes are a thing and that AI can create, you know, and that somebody obviously made that. The mentality behind that is so childish, obviously, you know?
Yeah. And you're not going to feel like the validation from posting some bold-faced lie. Like, obviously, people would have told him around, like, oh my gosh, Taylor Swift endorsed you. What a surprise. You know, she said terrible things about you in interviews and in posts, and she made cookies for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris last election.
Full-throatedly endorsed them in the last one,
Yeah. So the idea that, you know, he's like, well, I'll just say it. You know, like, that's showing that he's really, you know, breaking from reality because he can't really accept reality.
Yeah.
And so he's constantly trying to reinforce his own worldview, and now it's getting outlandish, you know?
Yeah. And we've seen that in the past too, with him using the Sharpie to circle the weather pattern and things like that, you know, doing all these things to sort of like make himself not wrong and not, you know, but it reaches a point where it's when you start involving other people, whether it's Fauci or whether it's, you know, Taylor Swift, where like at some point they have to say like, dude, you made that up. You can't just like put a picture of me on your Twitter and like, you're supposed to be a person that people trust for not only truth, but also to potentially run the country,
Yeah. And so talking about people running the country, here's a clip from Kamala's rally this week where she started to unveil some of her economic plans.
As State Attorney General, I drafted and helped pass a homeowner Bill of Rights, one of the first in America. And during the foreclosure crisis, I took on the big banks for predatory lending with many of my colleagues, including Roy Cooper, and won $20 billion for California families when I was Attorney General. So I know how to fight for people who are being exploited in the housing market. And I know what home ownership means. It's more than a financial transaction. It's so much more than that. It's more than a house. Home ownership and what that means, it's a symbol of the pride that comes with hard work. It's financial security. It represents what you will be able to do for your children. And sadly, right now, it is out of reach for far too many American families. There's a serious housing shortage. In many places, it's too difficult to build, and it's driving prices up. As president, I will work in partnership with industry to build the housing we need, both to rent and to buy. We will take down barriers and cut red tape, including at the state and local levels. And by the end of my first term, we will end America's housing shortage by building 3 million new homes and rentals that are affordable for the middle class. And we will do that together. We will do that together.
She's going to crack down on landlords and corporations that buy up lots of houses and sets the rent and then colludes with other landlord organizations to try to keep rents high, because one of the things she's going to offer in her plan is $25,000 to help with the down payment for first-time home buyers. And she stresses, and we're going to make sure they're actually going to the home buyers, not to companies that are, we have obviously a housing crisis in California, and around Los Angeles you'll see plenty of signs for available luxury towers which haven't been filled yet. And if you've been following Mayor Bass and her progress, we're just starting to make headway on getting people off the street by building lots of affordable housing. And now it's coming up like big blocks, big chunks, just huge cubes of apartments coming up. And
yeah, I've seen
you
them.
start to see the encampments go down, and you see the numbers go up. People are getting homes, and so it's really important for Kamala to be able to talk about this issue, and it's also something that is long overdue. And and I think it's a great contrast to Donald Trump, who not only is all about really expensive, overpriced housing, but he was convicted of lying about the value and the size of what he has.
Yeah. He's a notorious slumlord.
He's a notorious slumlord. He evicted a 72-year-old woman who had a stroke.
Yeah. The other thing that I think is striking about that clip is, and the stuff that follows that clip, is the specifics too. Yes. I mean, so often with politics, it's always, and certainly we saw this a tremendous amount in 2016 from Donald Trump. The idea that, making promises, but very light on specifics, never throwing out actual numbers, always saying like, oh yeah, and Mexico will pay for it and all these other things. And that's the way that it's made even easier to either not keep it or to just sort of, again, promise the moon, but never give any kind of specifics that actually you're held to. and that, or that even make it seem like it's a realistic actual thing that could happen. For me, I feel like, especially with the housing crisis, when it's like a lot of people can say stuff and, but when we start getting actual numbers, we start getting things of like, okay, this is making sense to me. And obviously these things are tremendous problems, certainly that are, the kind of things that are created over decades. So they're not going to be solved over the next 4 years, but you can start implementing in certain things that can start lightening the burden and start making turning the sort of boat, the ocean liner of change when it comes to these huge systemic issues, So I'm really refreshed by hearing not just her making a litany of promises, but actually kind of laying out in a realistic kind of way how those promises could actually be implemented.
Yeah. And here are some of the other things she pointed out she would bring. Up to $6,000 for parents of newborns when families' expenses are the highest, and up to $3,600 per child by restoring the expanded child tax credit. We already talked about the first-time home buyers getting $25,000 to help with the down payment. Another is to strengthen penalties for price gouging, especially on groceries, gas, and other essentials, including the landlord monopolies. So the idea that the media was trying to give her a hard time for not having specifics when they never really demanded it from Donald Trump. These were things that she was already rolling out last week, and so we'll be hearing more about those plans at the convention this week. But I think it's important to stress that she's already talking right to the middle class. Like, she doesn't need the media to try to translate it. It's like, well, I think what she was saying was she's going to provide first-time home buyers with $25,000 to help with the down payment of a new home. Like, they heard that. People,
Right.
They could just show the clip, and so there's no divining of like what sort of like word salad came out of Trump's mouth, with like boxes of cereal behind him that he can't even
Right.
like explain in front of his country club.
Yep.
So the contrasts are great, and I think we're seeing why voters and even Americans that don't normally vote are responding to her and so readily.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I think it's very difficult for Donald Trump to paint himself as a populist when he's not actually, bringing any kind of policy that would really help, the middle class. And I mean, obviously, when we're talking about the workers, you have him and Elon Musk joking about how they, they're going to fire anybody who uses their, constitutional right, as he likes to constantly reference the Constitution, and this mythical thing that he just says, like anything he disagrees with, like, oh, well, the Constitution says this and that,
Yeah, and I think Bernie Sanders is a good barometer because he was holding off his support. He just wanted to hear some of what the meat and potatoes were for
Right.
Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
And then after this speech, he was like tweeting it out, like, "Look at this, $6,000 per family, $3,600 per child." And he was going off. And so, he heard what he needed to sell it to the middle class. And I know he might seem like a broken record, but I think that's what a lot of politicians are about their issues. And so to see that kind of forward movement, in that part of the party where you didn't really have it before is really strong. And I think that's a sign of how she's succeeding in getting her message out. A big talking point that seems to be gathering steam is the idea that there was a coup in the Democratic Party when
Right.
Joe Biden stepped aside and suggested that Kamala be the nominee for president. This is a guy who's running Trump's campaign and is also famous for the John Kerry Swift boat smear.
Well, first and foremost, the way we view it, looking at it as, from where we are, I mean, this is nothing more than an attempted coup by the Democrat Party. They are actively engaged in an attempt, in my view, and a lot of people share this view, in deposing the President of the United States. Because look, you can't step down as a candidate for president because you're cognitively impaired while still being president. So, the two are linked.
Of course, he gets it completely wrong. Biden was not the one with cognitive issues. He's not talking about Hannibal Lecter at every available opportunity. He saw that he could actually help the rest of the ticket by getting someone else.
Right.
So,
to me, it's hilarious because it's that's like saying that a person isn't allowed to not run for president if they just choose to not to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, is there? And I think it says something, deep seated about a person, that it's like there's no such thing as someone who would willfully accept not a power, like not doing a power grab. That like this idea that like, well, why would he ever turn down that power? Perhaps because he's trying to do what he felt is best for the country. And, to me, it's hilarious that they can't even fathom the idea that he would choose to do this. It has to be a coup, because there's no way that any human being, and certainly no white male, would ever choose to not hold that power and somehow cede it to another generation, a younger generation, and God forbid, a woman of color,
Gosh, yeah.
that would never happen. So it must be a coup.
That's right. And so here's another article from Fox News. Hugh Hewitt, he's also in the Washington Post sometimes. Morning Glory, the cover up the coup, and Kamala. Here's Tom Cotton saying Joe Biden succumbed to a coup by Nancy Pelosi, Barack Obama, and Hollywood donors, ignoring millions of Democratic primary votes. Donald Trump took a bullet for democracy. Yeah, we still got questions about that. And Libs of TikTok, who's notorious for being wrong. The people who called us a threat to democracy for years just ran a coup against the sitting president. And this is actually my favorite, was Maureen Dowd in the New York Times in less than a month, going from Lord Almighty, Joe, let it go, urging him to step down, to the Dems are delighted, but a coup is still a coup. So there's really no winning. And of course, here's the master at misinformation driving it home.
The presidency was taken away from Joe Biden. And I'm no Biden fan, but I'll tell you what, from a constitutional standpoint, from any standpoint you look at, they took the presidency away. And people were saying he lost after the debate. He couldn't win. Well, I don't know that that's true necessarily. But whether he could win or he couldn't win, he had the right to run. And they took it away. They said they're going to use the 25th Amendment. They're going to hit you hard. Either we can do it the nice. I know exactly, because I know a lot of people on the other side, believe it or not. And they said, we'll do it the nice way or we'll do it the hard way. And he said, all right. So they've really taken, what they've done is pretty incredible. And now I'm running against somebody else, and we're leading. We're leading. So I'm not complaining. I'm saying for a country with a constitution that we cherish this constitution. To have done it this way is pretty severe, pretty horrible. You would have thought they would have gone out to a vote. They would have had a primary system. They would have done something. But to just take it away from him like he was a child. And he's a very angry man right now, I can tell you that.
Rebutting a lot of these claims. The presidency was not taken away from Biden. He's still the president. 81 million people voted for Biden and Harris in 2020, specifically so that Harris could take over for Biden if he were to step aside as president. And there's nothing in the Constitution about how parties nominate their candidate, as much as Trump would like to evoke that. There's nothing at all about how primaries are supposed to be run in the Constitution. And voters do not decide the party nominees directly, delegates do. And so Harris needed 1,976 delegates, and she received 3,359, handily getting the nomination. Also, it helped that there were no one else wanted to run against her because she already had that momentum and profile. But to the point about the public supporting it, raising over $300 million in less than a month, with 2/3 of that from first-time donors, suggests serious popular support. Moreover, this is what a coup actually looks like from the January 6th committee videos, and this is Bill Barr in his deposition.
I had 3 discussions with the president that I can recall. One was on November 23rd, one was on December 1st, and one was on December 14th. And I've been through sort of the give and take of those discussions. And in that context, I made it clear I did not agree with the idea of saying the election was stolen and putting out this stuff, which I told the president was bullshit. And, I didn't want to be a part of it, and that's one of the reasons that went into me deciding to leave when I did. I observed, I think it was on December 1st, that, how can you can't live in a world where the incumbent administration stays in power based on its view unsupported by specific evidence, that there was fraud in the election.
Bill Barr, on Election Day 2020, he was the Attorney General of the United States, the top law enforcement official in the country, telling the president exactly what he thought about claims of a stolen election. Donald Trump had his days in court to challenge the results. He was within his rights to seek those judgments. In the United States, law-abiding citizens have those tools for pursuing justice. He lost in the courts, just as he did at the ballot box. And in this country, that's the end of the line. But for Donald Trump, that was only the beginning of what became a sprawling, multi-step conspiracy aimed at overturning the presidential election, aimed at throwing out the votes of millions of Americans, your votes, your voice in our democracy, and replacing the will of the American people with his will to remain in power after his term ended. Donald Trump was at the center of this conspiracy, and ultimately, Donald Trump, the President of the United States, spurred a mob of domestic enemies of the Constitution to march down the Capitol and subvert American democracy. Any legal jargon you hear about seditious conspiracy, obstruction of an official proceeding, conspiracy to defraud the United States boils down to this. January 6th was the culmination of an attempted coup.
This is what happens, actually, after you attempt a coup. You get your mugshot taken. So I think so much of what is being said by Trump and these cronies is a naked attempt to try to minimize the actual coup attempt and try to spin this in some way that, like, oh no, we weren't the coup. They couped. They did the coup, not us. They couped. We didn't coup. They couped. So to review, not a coup. You see here Joe Biden, Kamala Harris's names on the ballot, and you see that they won the Electoral College and the popular vote, both their names, and this was a coup. And it's so scary to even look back at the photos of our Capitol being ransacked like that. But it happened, and they defiled the walls and they attacked police, and then when they tried to pretend it never happened after.
You know, again, going back to Donald Trump being childish, and it's, I think, a very sort of entitled, thing. I've seen it in my own child where it's like temper tantrums happen, and when it's over, it's like this, let's just pretend it never happened, like, because that's easier than confronting anything. That's easier than learning anything. That's easier than recognizing my own, part in that, scenario. It's just so much easier to just either diminish it until I don't have to feel bad, or let's just not talk about it. Let's move on. You guys, you're a broken record talking about that, Yeah. But I mean,
I don't like hearing about that.
Yeah, exactly.
What about my feelings?
Right. And that's where you expand that into the idea of, like, we don't have to talk about slavery. Come on. Critical race theory. Like, you're a bummer. And I didn't create slavery, so I don't want why I have to feel bad for it. And it's like, no. As recognizing that it's part of our history, recognizing the part that was played by our ancestors is part of the healing process, and to somehow, like, gloss over that, or to somehow, like, shove that under the rug, or ban the book or whatever, just because it's an inconvenient, historical truth for you, and you're like, I'm just trying to move on. You just want to keep us in the past. And it's like, no, there needs to be some understanding and some kind of a coming to terms with those things,
right? And that's where admitting that you're wrong, which you talked about last week, that's where that comes in, and self-respect for knowing that, like, wow, I confronted something difficult, but now I feel better for it because I acknowledged someone else and I'm processing that. So
and like the first episode where we talked about anger, and this idea of when you can feel righteous, it's interesting as a parent. There's sometimes where I'll have to deal with my kid having a temper tantrum or whatever, or, throwing any kind of tantrum. And it then becomes my place where I need to acknowledge, how am I going to deal with this, and how, I think that,
you can't anger back.
Exactly. Yeah, you can't anger back. And I wonder if that's a lesson that we can take in this in terms of how we combat, certainly Donald Trump is very good at bringing out his grievances, and I think that what we're finding is so effective with Kamala and her campaign is to not anger back,
Right. Yeah.
but to try and say, okay, we need to move forward, acknowledge the mistakes of the past, acknowledge what we can do to try and fix it. But this idea of just like, well, you said this and you did that, and just being like a bickering between two people, you realize like, okay, at the end of the day, the American people are not benefited by name calling each other to the
they
end,
tune out even more then, and that sort of serves his purpose. So this week in Men Making Men Look Bad, there was a hidden video of a guy interestingly named Russ Vote, for a guy who doesn't want people to vote. And so we'll show a clip from the Center for Climate Reporting.
I am opposed to the Department of Education because I think it's the Department of Critical Race Theory.
The Russ Vote were comrades in arms.
Formerly a cabinet member and chief lieutenant in the first Trump admin,
I want to thank Russ for doing an incredible job.
he now runs a group called Center for Renewing America.
An organization that I helped turn into the Death Star that is accomplishing all the debates that you are reading about. I think you have to rehabilitate Christian nationalism. You have the largest deportation in history, block funding for Planned Parenthood. I want to be the person that crushes the deep state.
Vote is one of the key authors of the blueprint for a second Trump administration.
Project 2025.
It's an ambitious 920-page blueprint.
Like eliminating the Department of Education.
The mass firings of civil servants.
Banning access to the abortion pill and further restricting abortion rights.
In recent weeks, the plans have become so controversial that Trump has been forced to distance himself.
They're sort of the opposite of the radical left, okay? You have the radical left and you have the radical right. And they come up with this, I don't know what the hell it is, it's Project 25.
Are you ready? I know nothing about Project 25. I haven't seen the document. I don't intend to really see the document.
But behind closed doors, Vote tells us not to take Trump's disavowal seriously.
I expect you to hear 10 more times from the rally, the president, distancing himself from the left's boogeyman of Project 2025.
Yeah. And you're not worried about that?
I'm not worried about it.
Okay.
He's running against a brand. He is not running against any people.
Okay.
He is not running against any institutions. It's interesting. He's in fact not even opposing himself to a particular policy.
I know how unpopular it is. I know that nobody wants this, so I'm going to try to keep it secret and sneak it by people once we can get him in with an unpopular vote.
It's interesting to see that sort of more, I would say, argue perhaps more evil side of the person that's like, let daddy handle things. Daddy knows best, which is certainly something that I think the patriarchy has been, forwarding since the beginning of time. This idea of like, it doesn't matter what these people want because I know what's best for them. They're all fools. They're all stupid. They don't know anything. And for an ideology that's constantly saying, oh, well, you elites, you think you're so much better than us. There's a shocking level of arrogance in the idea of these people saying like, we know what is best for everyone and we are going to force it down their throats, whether they like it or not. And the difference between say that and say the other side, which is to say, we think that diversity is good. And we think, all the progressive ideals, certainly people on the right feel that we're forcing the progressive ideals down their throats. But the difference though, is that we're not trying to really do anything that affects them. They don't like that we're trying to do things that affect people that they think should be subservient or that they think shouldn't have as many rights or, it's like this idea of like creating equality means a less than for the patriarchy, basically.
Right.
And so this idea is like, we need to control these other people because the system that we have is the one that should be in effect for everybody.
Right. And we're going to get rid of the Department of Education so that people are none the wiser, so that they just start to fall in line and that we can start to control them with Christian nationalism. And like, these are the kinds of things that like progressives might throw out as wild accusations. So it's pretty shocking to hear someone own up to it, be like, yeah, we got to bring Christian nationalism like all the way, man. We got to make that the law of the land.
Yeah. It feels so Big Brother.
Yeah.
If you reread 1984, it's pretty crazy to see how many things line up with the Project 2025 document, just in terms of, again, the sort of control of a narrative that then turns people dumber, you know, and more pliant, you know.
So speaking of people who are dumber, this week in Don't Be That Guy, Kevin Sorbo, known from Hercules, which I used to watch.
And nothing else.
Kevin Sorbo put out a tweet a couple weeks back saying, if Kamala really is black, have her say the N-word. Let the people decide for themselves. So there's a number of things to say to don't be that about. You know, one is that if you're a white guy, don't try to police other people's race or color or ethnicity. Definitely don't try to use the N-word as a measuring stick. Saying like, well, you people can say it and I can't say it. So if you say it, then that means that you either were in trouble or you really are one of those people who actually says that word, you know. And then let the people decide for themselves. No, she is what she is. There's no like idea if you you know of like, okay, then we get to decide on her ethnicity. You know, like it's never up for debate.
I guarantee you, if he had thought maybe for 15 seconds longer, he might have come to him. You know what? Maybe this is just opening up a lot of people making fun of me. You know, a lot of people criticizing me. You know, and just blatantly showing your ignorance. I think is a classic, you know, entitled white guy thing.
Yeah, then that's exactly right. And now, and on the flip side of Don't Be That Guy, a lot of people will make fun of Kevin Sorbo, you know, like because he's not working on things now. And that's what he gets a lot of flack for is like, yeah, well, we'll see you at the grocery store, you know, packing my stuff like that. But, you know, the truth is certainly living in LA, there's plenty of actors I know who have to drive Lyft or who have to work in grocery stores or do hard labor. And so just the same way, like if you call Britney Spears fat, you're calling everyone else who is looking fatter than her fat, you know, and that's going to be most people. So when you make fun of Kevin Sorbo for not working more in Hollywood when so many other people aren't working in Hollywood, you're sort of putting them down as well. When you've got this right here, this is a guy who's so clueless.
Fair point.
Yeah,
I think though that for me, there's certainly when arrogance becomes more and more misplaced. You know, I think that I would not have made fun of Kevin Sorbo for not working had he not just completely earned it with that tweet. You know what I mean?
Well, and he doesn't really have like this like place to speak from is the thing. He has no like authority. He has no like stature, you know, and talk about like not thinking through his tweets. You know, there's a famous series of tweets from January 6th where he says, now the people are showing up and now we're going to see what's happening. He's like, now we're making a stand. And then like 15 minutes later, this is Antifa. And it's just like, you've got to be kidding me, dude. You've got to be kidding that you even left the other tweets up and you kept adding to that. Then being like, oh no, never mind. This wasn't us, you know? And it's just like, don't be that guy. So, so in White Guy of the Week, on a much brighter note, here's Joe Biden.
The guy we're running against, what's his name? Donald Dump or Donald whatever. They want to get rid of this, what we passed. They're fighting to get rid of what we've just passed. No, I'm serious. No help from Republicans passing the Inflation Reduction Act thanks to the tie-breaking vote of Kamala made it possible.
Biden's signature Inflation Reduction Act received no Republican support, but was signed into law in 2022 after Harris's tie-breaking Senate vote. It was the first law to allow Medicare to negotiate prices for some of the most costly drugs that the program covers for 66 million people. Merck & Co.'s diabetes drug Januvia faces the steepest percentage cut in its price out of the drugs on the list, decreasing 79%. The government says Novo Nordisk's insulin Aspart products will face the second steepest at 76%. Republican House leadership in a statement described Medicare's power to negotiate drug prices as price-fixing. Drug makers have voiced their opposition to the new discounts, saying they would not necessarily lower out-of-pocket costs for patients and could hinder further innovation.
I made a documentary about the pharmaceutical industry and how they manipulate the data research and the marketing of their drugs. And when they say that they won't have money to spend on research, we know that they actually spend that money on marketing their drugs and coming up with new ways to patent them and market them as if they're somehow new because there's a yellow stripe around the pill now. This is just a list of some of the newly negotiated drugs, and I don't know, I can't say these names, but I could point out the costs, and that, you know, some of these are, you know, less than half what they were. And this is on top of his recent prisoner exchange. These are things he was working on while people were telling him to step aside.
During the coup.
Yeah. That's right. You know, our president's still managing to negotiate with Russia, which is something, of course, Donald Trump would never do. So for these reasons and more, Joe Biden is our white guy of the week. And so this week we have a video of Morley's to show that tells you a little bit more about his street art. You know, if you live in LA, you've seen his posters up for many years now, and you would know him from sight. But to a lot of people who are just discovering him, this piece will give you a really good insight as to how he got started and the kind of work he does and the kind of message he's spreading. And I think it really ties into a lot of the values that we're talking about on this podcast.
My sister moved to Los Angeles. There was a moment when we were talking when she said, you know, I moved out here with all these dreams, but it turns out I'm not an actress, I'm just a waitress. I wanted to create a piece of artwork that would reach out to her, or reach out to someone like her in a similar type of situations, offer them some kind of hope. I'm Morley. I'm a street artist based in Los Angeles. I would describe my art as messages, little bits of humor, hope, encouragement. It's vital that we fight the cynic that's inside of us. Somewhere in there's got to be a middle ground where we can acknowledge the hardships of living life, not become handcuffed by that. Growing up in Iowa City, I was always looking for some way to express myself, being in bands, and then lyrics were really important to me, and poetry was really interesting to me. And I was really drawn to screenwriting because I just liked being able to tell a story to someone. When I went to New York to major in screenwriting, I kind of thought this is going to be the beginning of me being like an independent filmmaker. One of the things about screenwriting that can be frustrating is that you're making blueprints, and sometimes those blueprints are for buildings that never get built. But then when I got to New York and started meeting all these people, all these exciting different art forms were at my disposal, all of a sudden I realized, oh, I don't need to limit myself in that way. I think all dreamers need to stop every once in a while and say, why am I dreaming this? Why is this my dream? And so I just started getting interested in ways of expressing myself that instead of trying to get people to come to me, that I could go to them, that I could create pieces of art that were injected into their world, something that they could sort of just see as they walked by. It was really exciting and freeing because you didn't need to have 1 million people give you permission. It went from being a hobby to then all of a sudden when I moved out to LA, I realized how much more gratifying it was, and it kind of took over my world. When I first got started, I always felt sort of self-conscious because so many great street artists are very talented painters. I'm at best a guy who can string some words together. But for me, it felt like, why not lean into that? It took a while for me to kind of get used to the idea that the words were enough. Identify yourself with the things that you feel you're self-conscious about, because then you can own them. I can use the name Morley, which is my middle name, which growing up I was always very embarrassed of. That's the fastest way to create an identity that is unique, is by just embracing the truth of who you are. The primary reason that I started including myself in the artwork was I wanted the messages to be coming from a person. I didn't want them to be coming from a logo or a brand. A lot of the time, the messages were for me first and foremost. They were the kind of thing that if I was walking down the street that I needed to see. Just because I'm the one putting up the messages, it doesn't necessarily mean that I don't struggle, that there's not days when I'm just like, what's the point? A lot of times I try to put that struggle into my work. I want people to know like that we're in the trenches together. This true success comes when I can take a complex idea and express it in as brief a way as possible, the kind of sentiment that can be seen when you're driving down the street at 30 miles an hour. Places I'm drawn to are construction walls or boarded up buildings where, you know, when they sell the building, they can take the boards down and no damage has been done. The posters I put up, they're just paper and a biodegradable glue. I'm very comfortable with how temporary my pieces are. If I wasn't comfortable with the fact that they're not going to last very long, I probably wouldn't just use paper and paste. I'd carve marble. I like the idea that it's just there for a little while and that the person that walks by it was lucky enough to see it while it was there. Another thing that's really cool is being able to see other photos that other people have taken of my stuff and to sort of see like, wow, I put that up 6 months ago and kind of forgot about it, but apparently it's still there and it looks a little rough, but people are taking pictures and enjoying it. The analogy I often use is artwork in a gallery is like a band playing at a venue, and artwork on the street is like the guy with the guitar in the subway stairwell. One of them just feels a little bit more like, oh, I didn't know this guy was going to be here, but here we are together sharing this moment, and I'm getting to experience something beautiful. There's a magic to that I love being a part of. About a year ago, I had my first child. I mean, I didn't have my first child, my wife did. I helped a little bit. Raising a child in this day and age is definitely a challenge. It's definitely difficult to not become overwhelmed by fear. It's been wonderful to witness the humanity that's kind of just like innate within my child. That it's really helped build in me is just patience. Patience with him, patience with myself, realizing what I actually really care about, what I actually really want to convey to this person. I'm less interested in him becoming a Supreme Court justice than I am with him being a nice, kind, generous person. His middle name's Morley too, so maybe one day, he'll take over. To know that I've given the gift of creative expression to my son. Anything that's in any of the books that I've made or plastered up against, a boarded up building, that my son will learn from that, will grow from that, will hopefully take that and run with the promise that tomorrow might just be a little bit better than today.
Cute kid. What do you have to show us here?
So basically, I thought it would be fun to make a couple of pieces with spray paint and offer them as incentives to donate to White Guys for Harris. And if you guys can screen grab your receipts of whatever you've donated, whoever's the top 2 people who've donated the most, we'll send these to them.
Yeah, within a week of when this podcast is posted. So within those 7 days, whoever gets us a receipt for the most donated to secure.actblue.com/donate/white dudes, then you will have some of your very own fancy Morley art signed by him, and with such inspiring messages as
We are the Avalanche.
We are the Avalanche.
And persist or perish.
Persist or perish. And if you haven't seen his work, what's the website that people can go see?
Morleyart.com.
Morleyart.com. I really like the part about not succumbing to the cynic within us, and finding out what your purpose is. Because we all have something different, and it really the trick is for us to pursue it and not necessarily expect huge rewards.
To be of service, I think is so important. Yeah,
to be of service is a very important concept. So thank you very much for joining us on this episode of White Guys for Kamala, and we will see you next week, and we'll have I think another artist to tell us about his work as well, which would be really impressive. So thank you again, and we'll see you out there.
This episode was recorded at Green Lab Studios in Los Angeles, California. Our engineers were Paul Roman and Owen Stinsmullen.